All right, welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. This is Module 3 on knowledge or epistemology. And this is a tricky one. There's a lot of material in the textbook to cover. We're not going to get to all of it in this lecture, but we're going to try to do as much as we can, and hopefully it's not going to be too long or too unwieldy. And I'm going to focus on the material that's going to be covered in the assignments, in the quiz, the discussion, and the written exam coming up. So hopefully this will be useful, but let's jump right into it. So philosophy, as we discussed in Module 1, is the questioning of foundational beliefs, those deep convictions that silently structure our experience of the world. Philosophy is thus inherently heretical, it's inherently anti-dogmatic, it probes for vulnerabilities in our worldview and destabilizes them through the ruthless application of logic, argumentation, and reasoning, all with the aim of rebuilding stronger, more resilient foundations for knowledge. And in this module, we're going to look at how philosophy turns these tools upon knowledge itself, by examining such questions as, where does knowledge originate? What is its source? Where does it come from? Is knowledge something that we discover in the world, or is it something that we create? Can we ever possess absolute certain knowledge about reality? Do our ideas about the world truly correspond to the way the world is? And who holds the authority to determine what counts as knowledge? Seems like a lot of power, right? The study of knowledge is called epistemology, and the story of epistemology is the story of the construction of the modern world. And like most stories in the Western philosophical tradition, it starts with Plato. Plato establishes three criteria for distinguishing between genuine knowledge, or episteme, and mere opinion, or doxa. For an idea to count as genuine knowledge, first, you must believe that the idea is true. You must genuinely believe it. 2, the idea must actually be true. It's got to actually be true. And 3, your belief in the idea must be justified. You need compelling reasons to believe it. You can't just accidentally stumble upon it. So you've got to believe it, it's got to be true, and your belief in it has to be justified. You have to come through it through valid reasoning, right? Together, these criteria are referred to as justified true belief. And this is a principle that is still hotly debated in philosophy and epistemology today. If you read the essay on the Gettier problems, there's a lot of debate, even in our readings, about justified true belief. We're not going to cover most of that in this lecture. But it's the third criteria, justification, that has typically caused the deepest division and controversies between philosophers. So that's the one we're going to talk the most about here. Now, historically, two schools of thought have largely dominated the debate around the source and the justification of knowledge. On the one side, you have the rationalists, rationalism, which holds that true knowledge originates from and is justified through reason and innate ideas. Right? The mind possesses certain foundational truths prior to and independent of experience. These truths are accessible through rational reflection. So you can reflect, you can look inward, and you could discover them without appealing to experience, without doing experiments, without appealing to observation. And they can provide the secure foundation for all other knowledge. On the other hand, the other school is empiricism, the empiricists. And they counter that knowledge originates from and is justified through observation and sensory experience. So the exact opposite. The mind begins, according to the empiricists, as a blank slate. It's an empty vessel. Impressions received from the external world form the building blocks of knowledge. So the mind enters the world blank, and experience fills it with ideas. And genuine knowledge is achieved through testing these ideas against experience. So, with that framework in mind, let's look at Plato, of course, who stands as one of philosophy's first rationalists. So he's gonna represent the rationalists to start. And he establishes a tradition that's going to continue through the modern period, which is what we're going to talk primarily about, and onto the present day. So, in the Meno, Plato has Socrates interrogate one of Meno's slaves, and appears to draw from him knowledge of geometry through recollection alone, like not through teaching, not through experience. Socrates interrogates the slave, who knows nothing about geometry, has never been taught geometry, and by asking a series of sort of prompting questions, kind of leads him to seemingly recall, to draw from himself, just through reflection, some fundamental principles of geometry. Now, according to Plato, this serves as a demonstration of a theory, anamnesis, which is the theory of knowledge as recollection, right? So according to Plato, our souls already possess truth from prior existences. Plato believes in reincarnation. So learning is not a process of acquisition, of acquiring truth, but of recognition, of recalling truth that's already there. It's already present in the soul or mind. You just have to apply sort of reasoned inquiry and draw it out. And it's this process of recalling what we already implicitly know, of making it explicit. Knowledge is thus grounded, according to Plato, in innate ideas. Now, innate ideas are truths which exist independently of experience, such as mathematical or geometrical certainties, and they're innate in the sense that you're born with them. You already possess them, right? And discovering knowledge is a process of making these innate truths explicit through rational inquiry. Now, the intellectual landscape from ancient Greece to the modern period, and we're going to talk about what that means, the modern period, was dominated by the teachings of Plato and his student Aristotle. We're talking about a span of about 2,000 years. So, historically, Athens, which is where Plato established the academy and where he taught, Athens was conquered by Rome, which led to this gradual fusion of Platonic and Aristotelian thought with Catholic orthodoxy, with the Holy Roman Empire after it becomes Christianized, begins sort of merging these ideas from Plato and Aristotle into the version of Christianity, of Catholicism that became the dominant orthodoxy of the Holy Roman Empire. And then it sort of spreads out through the known world of the time, through the Crusades and through missionary work and etc. So this really sort of populates and colonizes the known world, this cluster of ideas. And this lasts for about 2,000 years, until it begins to fracture during what's known as the early modern period, which is a historical period spanning roughly from the 16th to 18th century across the Western world, which is where we're going to be spending most of our time in this lecture. So what happened during this period to change that? Well, the mid-16th century witnessed the birth of the scientific revolution. That's primarily what happened. This is the time period known as the Enlightenment, right? So we have, to start out with, we have Galileo, who demonstrates through evidence, through telescopic evidence, that the Earth revolves around the sun, which contradicted 2 millennia of teachings, going back to Aristotle, which placed the Earth at the center of the universe. And so that was the church orthodoxy at the time. And by challenging this, Galileo got in a lot of trouble. And he faced persecution by the Catholic authorities of the time, who did not take the heterodoxy very well. So around this time, very shortly after Galileo, we have the French mathematician, scientist, and philosopher René Descartes, who was very aware of what was going on, because this was during his time period when the persecution of Galileo happened. And he's very aware of the dangers of trying to navigate this tension between the scientific revolution, this sort of emerging naturalistic view of nature, versus the established doctrines that exist within the Catholic orthodoxy, specifically dealing with the nature of the human soul. So he's going to try to figure out a way to keep both of these things intact, to make them compatible with one another. So for Descartes, nature appears as this vast machine. It's analogous to the clockwork sort of automatons and mechanisms of his time. And you'll notice a sort of a pattern that people tend to conceptualize the metaphysics of their time through the technology of their time. And we do this now with computers and digital analogies, and currently with artificial intelligence. That we kind of build a worldview out of that. That becomes the lens through which we understand ourselves. So, science, according to Descartes, reveals this universe of matter and motion, right? Driven inexorably by these unyielding laws of mechanical causal determination, where the state of the universe today is determined absolutely by the state of the world yesterday and the day before, going all the way back in time. It's this, again, this clockwork mechanism universe. And Descartes faced the challenge of trying to defend this mechanistic view. And again, he was a scientist, so he did a lot of practical science, and this was something that his practice revealed to him, that this sort of mechanical nature. But he was aware that it clashed with the reigning sort of understanding of the universe that was inherited at that time through from the ancient period up through the scholastic and medieval periods. So he's trying to defend the scientific mechanistic view, this Galilean view of the universe, both against skeptics who sort of rising out of the Protestant Reformation, where there was a lot of skeptical arguments, and Pyrrhonic skepticism at the time, that were challenging a lot of beliefs, but also against potential blowback from the Catholic Church. No one wanted to get on the bad side of the Catholic Church during this period. That genuinely went poorly for people. So Descartes came up with a solution to this, and that solution was to appropriate the tools of radical skepticism, the tools that the skeptics used, and to turn them against the skeptics, to use the tools of skepticism to establish the foundations for absolute epistemic certainty. And this is going to be his famous method of doubt, right? So Descartes is sort of the rationalist philosopher par excellence. He's the archetype of the rationalist. His method is entirely introspective. So his goal is this quest for certainty, to uncover the ground of certain knowledge. And to get to that, he wields rational inquiry, this sort of skeptical method, like a wrecking ball, just to destroy everything, to clear a path for truth by destroying every class of belief that emits of even the slightest possibility of doubt. So that's a pretty harsh criteria there. Anything that it is possible to doubt, he's going to toss out, and whatever remains, that's going to be his ground of certainty. That's the challenge that he sets himself to, which is a pretty ambitious project to attempt. Now, this method of doubt unfolds systematically through increasingly radical steps. And this is all in Descartes' Meditations. And you have a little bit, this is split up sort of across modules 3 and 4 in your readings. But I'm going to go through a really quick summary of what Descartes' up to here. So he begins with the foundational assumption of empiricism. Empiricism was already around at this point through Francis Bacon, etc. Descartes is a rationalist. He does not like empiricism. So he begins with the foundational assumption of empiricism. That's the first thing he's going to take his wrecking ball to. And that is the assumption that we discover truth inductively through inductive reasoning based on sensory experience, sensory evidence, right? But our senses can sometimes deceive us. So there is that possibility of doubt, right? And he gives this famous argument, it's called the dream argument, where he notes that we don't really have a good criterion for reliably distinguishing between when we're asleep and when we're awake, when we're dreaming and our waking states of consciousness. As he's writing this, he's imagining that, I could be dreaming that I'm here by the fireplace writing this book of meditations, and then I wake up and, oh, it was all a dream. There's no way, you don't realize that in the dream that you're dreaming usually, unless you're a lucid dreamer. But still, there's that possibility of doubt, and that's all Descartes needs here. All he needs is the possibility of doubt to tear something down. He's looking for certainty, right? And it's unwise, from his perspective, to put faith in anything that can deceive you even once. So again, very high bar for certainty. Pushing further, he's not done. Descartes questions mathematical truths next. Which you'd think as a rationalist, he'd be far more sympathetic to mathematical truths, and he is. But, and these are arrived at through deductive reasoning. You don't necessarily need to appeal to experience for mathematic truths, but Descartes, even here, he's not satisfied. He's like, well, he comes up with this, another famous thought experiment. This is called the evil demon, or the malicious demon. And the idea is this. It's possible, it's theoretically possible, that there could be this evil demon, right, of immense power and cunning. And this demon is devoted entirely to systematically deceiving us all the time about everything. Everything we could possibly believe, mathematical truths, not just the evidence of our senses, but the fundamental principles of logic. Everything that we believe could be an elaborate ruse that this powerful demon is causing us to believe because he has a lot of free time, he's an evil demon. Basically, the idea that Descartes' going for here, which he couldn't say out loud, is that what if God's a deceiver? What if God is deceiving us? You couldn't put that idea really out there explicitly at the time without the church noticing, and that going relatively poorly for you. So we get the malicious demon, who seems to have all the powers of God, in the sense of being able to completely construct a false reality and convince you of it entirely. And from Descartes' perspective, this throws virtually everything into doubt. And he's not dealing with individual beliefs here, he's talking about entire classes of belief. So he is wiping the plate clean just with these huge arguments, with the dream argument, with the evil demon argument. Yet, even here, when he's faced with this radical skeptical hypothesis that in essence an evil God could be just deceiving us about every possible thing, Descartes discovers that there's one thing, even under that circumstance, that he can't doubt. There's one truth that is impervious to every possible attempt at doubt, and that's what he's looking for. Even if every belief that we hold is suspect, the very act of doubting itself presupposes that there's a doubter, that there is something or someone, a thinking subject, a self, that is capable of being deceived. If something can deceive you, there's a you that can be deceived. And Descartes believes that he's found his ground of certainty here. This is the thing that he cannot coherently doubt without contradiction, because even if he doubts this proposition, he's proving that he exists by doubting it. There's no way out of it. There is a thinking subject able to doubt, able to be deceived. And this is where his famous conclusion, his famous motto, which you've probably heard before this class, if you have no background in philosophy, you've probably still heard, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Actually, this comes from a different book. He's got an earlier formulation of it in the Meditations that you're going to read. He was still workshopping the idea. But yeah, that's the idea, that the one thing that you can't doubt is that you exist, because if you doubt that you exist, you are demonstrating that there is a you that exists. You can't get around it. Whatever else may be doubted, it's unquestionable that Descartes exists as a thinking thing, what he calls a res cogitans, thinking thing. That's the Latin. And this is the foundation of certainty upon which Descartes is going to rebuild knowledge of the world, because he's destroyed everything and he's gotten down to this sort of bedrock of, well, we know that's the only thing that we know with certainty exists is that there is a thinking subject who's capable of being doubted. So now that he's got that, and he calls that the cogito, that is the self, the thinking thing. Now that he's got that, he's going to try to rebuild the world back up. So that's the project. That is his ground of certainty. And his overall goal is, again, to demonstrate that religious faith and mechanistic science can coexist together peacefully, that they can fit together. So to do that, Descartes needs to show that the thinking self exists outside of the clockwork, sort of mechanistic determinism of the natural universe, which he also very strongly believes in. And he's trying to defend both of these things simultaneously, that there is this immaterial, undoubtable, immutable self, indivisible, and also that there is a mechanistic universe that is understandable through scientific explanation and prediction. He wants both of these things. So what is this indubitable self, the self that cannot be doubted? Well, for Descartes, it's what remains when the laws of matter have been stripped away. When you take away everything about that mechanistic universe, all the laws of nature, what you have left is the cogito, the thinking self, the thinking thing. So to sort of figure out what that means, Descartes is going to first explore, what is this world of matter that we're rejecting? And he does this through his wax example. So imagine a piece of wax. It's a piece of wax. You get it directly from the beehive. It's it's got a certain smell. It tastes of honey fresh from the hive. It's got a texture. It's got a color and all these sorts of things. It's got all these sensible properties. But when it's heated, when you hold it up to a flame, its sensible properties change, right? It melts. It's transformed. All the things that we perceive about it. It's where it was solid before, now it's all melty. Where it tasted kind of sweet before, now it tastes like melted wax. So its sensible properties seem to have all transformed. Yet we still know it's the same wax. We're not like, what is this new thing that's here? I just had a piece of wax before, now I have this melted thing that's totally different. We understand that it's the same thing. And why is that? How do we make that determination? We don't make it through our senses, right? We don't make it through the evidence of our senses, because the evidence of our senses say that, well, before it melted, it had these properties. It was solid, it tasted sweet, it was yellow, whatever. Then after it melts, it has all these other properties. Our senses report back entirely different experiences to us, that now it's melted, now it smells different, tastes different. If you're wanting to taste I don't know why you would want to taste the wax, but it's all these sensible properties have changed. So it's not the senses, it's not what we're experiencing through our senses about the wax that tells us it's the same wax. So what is it? According to Descartes, it's reasoning. We are able to reason. We are applying the principles of reason when we determine that it is the same wax now, after melting, than it was before it melted. And what our reason leads us to there, what it finds as being the essence of matter in this case, is what's called extension. And this is a word from the period that really is only used in philosophical context these days. But what it means, it literally means what it says, something that's extended in space, something that takes up space in the world of physical matter, that has volume and mass and displaces other objects, something that has a physical, extended spatial existence. This, for Descartes, is going to be the essence of matter. What he calls res existens. Right? So what remains is a material body occupying physical space. The substance of the wax is understood through its persistence as an extended thing. Thus, Descartes concludes that two fundamental substances exist in the world, right? So we've established through the original experiments, through the dream experiment, through the evil demon, we get rid of all the laws of nature, everything to do with our senses, to do with matter, and what we're left with is the thinking thing, the res cogitans, which is the thinking substance. And this notion of substance goes back to Aristotelian metaphysics. It's substance is the essence of a thing that persists, even though all of its properties may change. So it's what's eternal and what persists through time about a thing. It's what makes a thing a thing. It's what makes something itself, right? It's its essence. So the substance of the mind is that it's a thinking thing. That's the substance of the self, the soul. For matter, for the physical world, the causal mechanistic nature, the substance of that is defined by its extension in space. So we have a world now split into two substances. We have the immaterial thinking thing, the mind, the self, the soul, as something that is completely outside of this causal deterministic nexus, this matrix of causal determinism, of mechanism, this clockwork universe, and this world of material. And on the other hand, we have the world of matter, this world of extended things, which is where all of that causal action, where matter and laws of nature, where all of that happens, is in the world of extension. So res cogitans, res existans, the thinking thing and the extended thing. And this is known as Cartesian substance dualism, where he splits the world into two types of substance, the immaterial and the material, the thinking thing and the extended thing. And this is going to create lots of problems for philosophy down the road. So this is the point where we enter what Daniel Dennett calls the Cartesian theater, which is a great turn of phrase and a great description of where we're at. So imagine consciousness as a theater. You know, it's like a movie theater. Like you're watching a movie. You are the thinking subject. You're that immaterial thinking thing, the Cartesian cogito, and you're sitting in darkness, watching images projected on the screen. These projections represent your experiences, your sensations, and your perceptions. Everything you perceive, the colors, sounds, and textures of experience, all of that is projected on this internal screen. This is where Descartes' meditations ultimately strand us. We're a mind severed from the world, a ghostly spectator locked inside the theater of the real. So we're this immaterial, ghostly self watching this this projection of sensory experience. And this idea is going to get developed further as different thinkers sort of take it on. But it immediately leaves us with two kind of unsettling questions, right? First, how can this ghostly, immaterial observer who's in the theater ever actually interact with the physical world of extended matter? We've already identified the extended world of matter as where causation happens, right? That's where things interact causally. That's what interaction means. So how is something that is immaterial, how is that going to cause anything in the material world? How does something immaterial interact with something material? It's two entirely different types of things, and it doesn't seem like there's an easy way to get them talking to each other, to get any sort of interaction here. So we've utterly severed the mind from the body here. And that we're going to deal with that one in Module 4. But I'm just sort of foreshadowing it here. It's spoiler alert. We're going to do a lot of stuff with the mind-body problem in the next module. The one we are going to deal with in this module is the appearance-reality problem. How do we know that the images on the screen of the internal theater actually correspond to anything in the objective real world? How do we know that the pictures we're seeing on the internal screen actually match up with reality? How do we know it's not some elaborate fiction? And this is a problem. Descartes was aware of this. He had a lot of critics in his own time who pointed this out, and it's something that he was not ignorant to the fact that this was a potential conclusion of his theory. But he attempts to bridge this appearance-reality distinction by reasoning from the certainty of his own existence, which he's established through his skeptical method, right? I think, therefore I am. From there, he reasons to the certainty of God's existence. And he offers a few proofs. I'm not going to walk through all of those. But part of it comes down to that he uses his reason, what he calls his clear and distinct ideas about things. And something is clear if it's sharply defined, it's distinct if it's clearly separated from other concepts. And so this clear and distinct reasoning, we can follow that train of thought and we arrive at the truth of God's existence. And because God is a perfect being, he is not a deceiver. That would be an imperfection, and we know logically it's impossible for God to have imperfections because part of God's nature is perfection. So we know that we can trust our clear and distinct ideas because God, as a perfect being, wouldn't deceive us about something like that. The truth of the clear and distinct ideas that we use to reason to the existence of God are underwritten by the fact that God's not a deceiver. And there's a problem with that line of thinking. This move, using God to guarantee that our clear and distinct knowledge is reliable after establishing God's existence through those same clear and distinct principles, is what's known as the Cartesian circle now. It's a special case, if you remember the logical fallacy of begging the question that we talked about in the last module, where you assume the conclusion in the premises. That's basically what Descartes is doing here. And that's a problem because he uses that to essentially rebuild the world that he's just torn down. Descartes was very good at tearing things down, not so good at building them back up again, turns out. So that's going to bring us to responses to Descartes leaves us in a world where basically we're in this skeptical predicament now. We've established the certainty of the self, but we've thrown literally everything else into question. We've got nothing else that we can really rely on as certain. So along comes John Locke to solve the problem for us, and the empiricists. And we're gonna talk about three empiricists in this module, which is John Locke, Bishop George Berkeley, and David Hume. They're called collectively the British empiricists, which is wrong because only Locke was British, Berkeley was Irish, and Hume was Scottish. But it's good to have a collective name in this case, so we call them all the British empiricists, and they're all kind of a part of the same discussion. So anyway, John Locke. So Descartes sought certainty through rational introspection. Locke's going to approach knowledge from a completely different direction, from the entirely opposite side of the debate. Descartes' defense of the compatibility between science and faith was inspired in part by Galileo's persecution by the Catholic Church, right? Similarly, when Locke comes along, this is going to be in the time of Newton, of Isaac Newton. So the sort of mathematical physics that became the foundation for classical physics, Locke and Newton knew each other. They were friends. And Locke's empiricist philosophy is inspired by the birth of Newtonian mechanics, of Newtonian physics, which is really the birth of modern science we see happening here. So, like Newton's, Locke's world is going to be one of forces and powers, right? This corpuscular world where things are interacting. It's matter and motion, but it's atoms and void. It's things pushing and pulling against each other. It's very vibrant, very alive, very powerful and dynamic universe. Entities are engaged in this complex causal nexus of interactions guided by these universal laws and principles that kind of govern everything. Nature operates through these principles of dynamic necessity, right? This forceful connections that bind one event to another. So everything is connected by this sort of, by the forces and powers of causation and the natural laws and things of that nature. So it follows for Locke that our perceptions should result from similar causal processes, right? If that's how nature works, that's how we should work as well. So for Locke, this is going to arise from the powers of objects to imprint themselves upon our sense organs. So he's going to tell a causal story here. He's going to tell a mechanical causal story about how ideas from the world get into our minds. He's going to try to put the world and the mind back together after Descartes ripped them apart. And he's not going to be the last person to try to do that. We're still trying to do that, really. What Locke isn't going to do, what he doesn't like, is Descartes' idea of innate ideas. He wants nothing to do with innate ideas. These ideas that transcend experience, that are already sort of pre-installed in your mind, like when you buy a new computer and it's got Windows 11 like already installed on it, whether you want it or not. Like Descartes' mind comes with the innate ideas version of Windows 11 installed on it. All you have to do is look at the source code and you're going to find all of the answers in there. Same with Plato. Only Descartes doesn't appeal to reincarnation to get there. But it's the same basic idea that we're born already with this knowledge. Locke thinks that's wrong. Locke thinks that if it were true, if people were born with these innate ideas, right, then we would expect people to agree, more or less across the board, on self-evident principles, right? There wouldn't be disagreement about this stuff because the ideas are already there. Everyone would be born already knowing all these things, so there shouldn't be disagreement. Yet, people seem to disagree about some pretty fundamental stuff. We would expect young children to also know these self-evident logical principles. Also doesn't seem to be the case. Turns out you gotta actually raise kids and teach them stuff. They don't already know the secrets of the universe. So we find in experience, and again, Locke's always gonna go to experience, we don't find evidence for innate ideas. What we do find is that perceptions always seem to correspond to specific sensory organs. If someone is born blind or loses an eye, loses both eyes, then they tend not to see things. There seems to be some relationship between having eyes and seeing things that Locke notes. And he doesn't think that the innate ideas approach really explains that. And there's, in addition to that, things like there are ideas that seem to force themselves upon us, right? Like if you're out in the bright sun, you're going to see bright sunlight, assuming you have eyes. Even if you close your eyes, you're going to have the light sort of penetrating through your eyelids. You can't escape it. You can't escape certain sensations. They force themselves upon you, whether you want them to or not. So what we find, according to Locke, when we look at the experience we have of the world, is that the mind emerges as what he calls a tabula rasa, which means a blank slate, an empty vessel, just waiting for the world to inscribe knowledge upon it through lived experience, through sensory experience. And that is how we acquire knowledge. The source and justification for knowledge isn't these innate ideas that you access through kind of from your armchair by just introspecting on the rational nature of things. You have to actually go to the world. You have to actually experience things. You have to interact with reality. And that's where you get the building blocks of knowledge. So Locke's going to tell a story about how this works, about how this happens, to explain how external objects give rise to ideas in the mind. And to do this, he's going to introduce an important distinction between what he calls primary and secondary qualities in objects. And it's a fairly complicated account, and there is still some disagreement on exactly how this works within Locke's system. And part of that, I think, is that Locke doesn't entirely know how this works in his system. But we'll stick to sort of the uncontroversial parts of it here. Primary qualities. So we're talking about qualities, characteristics, properties of objects, right, out in the world. These properties are going to explain how ideas get from the world into our mind, how things in the world generate ideas in our minds. So primary qualities are the fundamental, mind-independent properties of objects, right? The stuff like solidity, shape, extension, there's that word again. The atomic properties of objects, the things that are immutable. So think about an apple, right? An apple, your sort of generic thought experiment apple is round, smooth, solid, it's probably red. No one ever uses green apples for these sorts of thought experiments. It's always the red apples. So, but these are mind-independent qualities of an apple, right? If you aren't looking at the apple, it doesn't stop being round and smooth and solid. I mentioned redness. Bracket that out. That's like red and green. That's secondary qualities. The stuff with primary qualities, that we're talking about are the things grounded in the atomic structure of the atom. Things like number, shape, solidity, extension, the things that are mind independent, the things that don't change based on whether or not you're looking at the apple, based on whether or not there's an observer present. Qualities that are objective rather than subjective in character, right? But those aren't the only qualities that an apple has. I mean, it also has redness if it's a red apple. It appears red and it tastes sweet, presumably. Again, not a Granny Smith apple, obviously. And these are examples of what Locke means by secondary qualities. So we have primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary qualities, the mind-independent objective qualities of objects out in the world. Those are not ideas. Those are not things in the mind. Those are things that are in the objects that are out in the world. Secondary qualities, which include the host of familiar sort of sensory impressions that we have of the world, right? Things such as color, taste, smell, the subjective character, the quality of our experience of things. That is what he means by secondary qualities. Now, unlike the mind-independent primary qualities, secondary qualities aren't in the objects. They're not out there in the objects. They're in the mind. They're subjective qualities rather than objective qualities. They have their existence in the mind alone. They don't even resemble things out in the world, which is we'll circle back around to that point later. So primary qualities. Primary qualities possess the power to, and again, when we talk about power here, we're talking about causal power, which is something like a capacity. The ability that something has to cause change in something else, or the ability that something has to be changed by its interaction with something else. That's what we mean by power in this context. Causal power. So primary qualities possess the power to impress themselves upon our sense organs, our eyes for sight, nose for smell, etc., as what Locke calls impulses. And this is very similar to the science that we have now of how this happens. Locke was not far off, which is not bad for a guy writing several hundred years ago. Excuse me. So, primary qualities possess the power to impress themselves upon our sense organ as impulses. And our sense organs, in turn, possess the power. They also have power. Like our sense organs are powerful just as the objects are powerful. And our sense organs have the power to be impacted, to be changed by the primary qualities of objects. So the primary qualities can act upon our sense organs, and our sense organs can be acted upon by the primary qualities of objects. And it's this dynamic connection, right, of natural necessity that between the powers of objects and the powers of our sense organs that facilitates this transmission of impulses from the world to the mind, right? Because it has to be this, there has to be a power on either side. There has to be an ability to cause change and an ability to be changed in order for this, this dynamic to work. It's this push-pull that's happening with everything in nature. Everything is affecting or being affected and reciprocally all the time. Everything is interacting all the time. So, physical impulses, which are, again, produced in our sense organs by the primary qualities of objects, are then relayed to our sense organs, are relayed from our sense organs to our minds, right? So, the properties of the primary qualities of the apple cause certain impulses to be transmitted through these causal powers to our sense organs, and then our sense organs transmit these impulses to our brain, where they are transduced is the word within cognitive science for this, within neuroscience, where these physical impulses are changed into qualitative sensations. What Locke calls simple sensations. And they're simple because they are literally simple. They're atomic. They're like a little patch of redness, a little patch of hardness, a little patch of whatever the sensation is. It's individual atomic. Again, this is very Newtonian. This is atoms. This is atoms and void, right? So simple sensations, such as the red color and the sweet taste of the apple. Physical impulses are relayed from our sense organs to our minds as these simple sensations. And these individual simple sensations form simple ideas, which are the building blocks from which Locke constructs his account of knowledge. So, and I should point out here the relation between primary and secondary qualities here. Primary qualities cause secondary qualities to impact us. It's kind of, and this is where the sort of complication of Locke's system comes into being, because secondary qualities are sort of like a power that primary qualities possess. So what grounds the secondary qualities, what grounds the sensations of redness or sweetness that show up as simple ideas in our minds, these are the secondary qualities, which are powers that are possessed by the primary qualities, by the atomic structure, by the shape, solidity, number, size, etc. of the apple. So the objective qualities have the power to produce these subjective qualities in us, which then become sensations, which then become simple ideas, and those simple ideas can be combined through an act that Locke calls reflection. And for Locke, everything is either sensation or reflection. These are his two categories of knowledge, right? So this story has been about, so far, how sensations reach the mind from the world. Now, once they're in the mind, we have these simple sensations, but they're simple, they're atoms, they're building blocks. To put them together, you have to use recollection. You have to perform these operations on them, combine them, compare them, generalize out from them. We have to put them together. We have to build a sensory sort of universe out of these atoms of sense experience. And that's how we form complex ideas, what Locke calls complex ideas of the world. And this story, this is the way that Locke is going to rebuild the world that Descartes tears down. And I hope that was clear. The main thing to take from this is sensations and reflections are going to be your two categories of knowledge. Sensations are your sort of raw experiences of things, and then reflections are going to be an operation whereby the mind creates complex ideas out of simple sensations. So it's something the mind does. Right? Sensations are something the mind has. Reflection is something the mind does. It uses sensations as tools. And the other distinction is the primary and secondary qualities. The thing to keep in mind about that is primary qualities belong to objects in the world, whereas secondary qualities are subjective. They are properties that show up in minds alone. They aren't out there in the world. Secondary qualities do not exist in the objects themselves. Okay, so this idea is still around in different variations. It's been reformulated by different people in different ways. We're going to be looking at Bertrand Russell, once again, who has his own version of Locke's story, which is the sense data theory. So we've described this process, this mechanical process through which external objects paint sensory ideas across this blank canvas of our mind, right? The tabula rasa, which is blank page waiting to be inscribed by the world, waiting to have knowledge written onto it by experiences in the world. But we're not out of the theater. We're still in the Cartesian theater. This explains, how images get on the screen, but it doesn't get us out of the theater, because we're still assuming that there is a Cartesian subject that is inside your brain. And Dan Dennett calls this the homunculus theory, that there's, like, inside of you, there's a little you who's watching the screen that's playing the world. And this creates a problem of regress. So is there another homunculus inside the homunculus's head that is watching another screen, and on and on and on. But this picture, it's sort of like this, like perception, like experience is a veil that is drawn between the mind and the world, right? We're not directly seeing or experiencing the external world. We're not directly experiencing reality. It's always indirect. It's what's called indirect or representational realism. What we're seeing is a representation. And there's a lot of science backing this up today, by the way. There's a lot of studies that strongly indicate that something like this is going on, which is kind of unsettling because of the implications of it that we're going to get into. But it seems like what we actually experience are representations of what's happening in the world that are generated by the interactions of our sense organs in the environment. That locks onto something here, right? So Russell is going to introduce the term sense data to talk about this, and sense data are basically the same thing as Locke's simple ideas. They're the immediate impressions that we have of sensory qualities of things, and they're representational, right? We encounter something in the world, and it produces in us these sort of atoms of sensory input, of sensory data, such as a patch of redness, a patch of sweetness, a patch of a certain smell, and that we combine these and we build a whole sensory universe, a whole sensory ecology out of these atomic individual bits of sensation. So we have a sensory universe constructed out of individual atoms of representative sense data. And that's the way, in 20th century terms, we're going to talk about the Lockean theory. And one way to look at this is to consider a familiar example of a perceptual illusion. And this is something that's used to defend this representational picture. So think about a stick that's like submerged halfway into a glass of water, or a puddle, or really any body of water. And what does it look like? It's a straight stick. You know it's a straight stick. You can measure it when it's out of the water, and it's straight. You stick it halfway into the water, and it looks like it's bent. It looks like it kind of does this thing. It looks like it breaks. It distorts. And this is a problem. The fact that our senses are showing us this bent stick, but we also know that that's not true. That's not how the world actually is. That's not an accurate representation of reality. And there are many other examples from illusion. This is just sort of one of the quick and easy off-the-shelf ones. I'm sure you can think of many, anything from hallucinations, go back to Descartes and his dreams, or any situation in which you can see a visual illusion that's triggered by whatever. There are occasions where it very much appears that what we see, what we sense, what we experience is not what an objective scientific observer measuring things, on the atomic level sort of is going to report back. There's this mismatch between what the philosopher Wilfrid Sellars calls the manifest image, which is how the world sort of manifests itself to us in our experience, versus what he calls the scientific image, which is the world that's described by objective scientific measurement, right? The way the world actually is versus the way the world it appears to us. They don't always seem to match up. And as Descartes says, if something is going to deceive us even once, then it's foolish to place our belief in its certainty. So we do seem to be observing something that is not identical to the thing in itself. We do appear to be looking at a representation, experiencing a representation of reality, rather than reality itself. Now, this is a problem for an empiricist, because the empiricists, their entire theory is based on the notion that we get knowledge directly from interacting with the world through our experiences, right? So if our experiences don't match the world, then that's not a good source of knowledge. And this is known as the correspondence theory of truth. The idea, it's usually, in modern terminology, it usually refers to language that our statements are true if and only if they accurately represent the state of the world. The snow is white if and only if the snow is white, right? The statement that the snow is white is only true if there is in fact snow that is white, right? That our statement should hook onto the world. In this case, we're talking about it in terms of perception, which our perceptual experience provides us with true knowledge of the world if and only if what we perceive is actually the way the world is. If it fails to correspond, if it fails to match up, then it's not accurate. Then whatever it is that we are experiencing, it is not the world. So here we are, we're back in the Cartesian theater again, right? We're again this immaterial subject, this immaterial observer who's in the theater watching this film strip of things that's constructed, it's like when you're watching a television or a computer monitor that if you look closely, it's all these little pixels that form the images on the screen, right? And that's basically what Russell and Locke are talking about here. They're just, obviously Locke didn't have a computer monitor back in the 17th century, but he kind of had the idea already that experience is built out of these individual sort of atoms of sensory data. And sense data is going to be the term that Russell applies to that. So we're in the theater and we're watching this film strip of the world, of experience that's built up out of these individual atoms of sensation. But we're not directly seeing or smelling or tasting or feeling the world. And that's a problem. So Russell, and Russell is aware of this. The reason, at least in our reading, that he is talking about sense data theory is to problematize it. He believes it. He believes that it's an accurate representation of the way we experience reality, but he also acknowledges that there's a problem there because we can never know if the table that we're seeing in our experience actually matches the table in the real world. And you can look at it from different perspectives, under different, lighting, under different observational conditions, and watch all the properties change. All of these things seem to indicate that our experience is not numerically identical with the thing itself, right? So Russell's concerns about this are basically a restatement of concerns that were, well, they aren't concerns, but arguments that were originally stated by Bishop George Berkeley. Berkeley was an Irish bishop, and he read Locke's work, and he was like, no, I agree with your reasoning here, except for one minor thing, which is that the whole bit where you infer from the experiences that you're watching within the theater, the whole part where you infer that there are real objects out there in the world that are causing these ideas, you have no reason to say, you have no justification for that. You have no evidence to make that claim. And he's gonna do this by attacking the primary and secondary quality distinction, which is a major vulnerability of Locke's system, and Berkeley identifies it and just goes for it. So according to Locke, an apple's secondary qualities, we're back to the apple, its color, its taste, its smell, its subjective qualities, they exist only in the perceiving mind, right? But strip away these secondary qualities, Berkeley's going to say, and what do you have left? If you take away the way something, the color, the taste, the smell, all of these perceptual qualities, the qualities that resemble ideas, if you take those away, what do you have left in experience? Nothing. You got nothing. If you take away all the experiential qualities of a thing, you have no idea left. You're left with no idea of the thing. You've got nothing left. And there, like a lot of these things, there are different ways of taking Berkeley's argument here. One is that primary qualities like shape, extension, number, etc., these things also are ultimately reducible to secondary qualities. That they too are the sorts of things that have to be subjective. Like the size of something, you see a building off in the horizon and it looks, tiny, and then you get closer and it's like, wow, that's a skyscraper. But that was not something, the size of it perceptually depended on your relation to it. So it had to do with you interacting with the thing. That's a quality that was produced in the interaction rather than something that existed independently of a perceiver, right? So that's one way of taking Berkeley here. And the other thing is just that if the other way of taking him is that if you eliminate all of the secondary qualities, which are the things that, according to Locke, are like ideas. They are the experiential qualities. If you take those away, you just got nothing. there's nothing behind those. And as Berkeley puts it, and this is called his master argument, an idea can be like nothing but an idea. So if secondary qualities are the things that are like ideas, primary qualities aren't like ideas, they're like things in the world. Secondary qualities are like ideas, they resemble ideas. But the only thing that can resemble an idea is an idea. So if the idea, if the notion, if the concept is that the primary qualities don't look like ideas, don't resemble ideas, then you have no idea of them. You can't comprehend that. You can't even form the notion of a thing that's not an idea. Try it. Try to think of an idea of something that's not an idea. Try to imagine something that's not capable of being imagined. Whatever it is you're thinking of, it's not what Locke's talking about. It's not whatever you're thinking of is going to be an idea, and you can't really get around that. And that's Berkeley's master argument. So if all we know are ideas, and ideas exist only in minds, right? Then mind-independent material objects, the idea that there are objects out in the world that are independent of minds, that we don't really have a justification for making that leap. It's not only that we don't know them, it's not only that we can't get outside of the Cartesian theater to compare the representation to the thing, which is a big issue with the whole Cartesian theater thing, is that you're locked in there. You can't step outside of the theater to compare the representation with the reality. And Berkeley's taking that farther. He's saying that the notion that there's something outside of the theater is an incoherent notion. You don't have a real concept of what a thing that's not an idea is. If you think you do, what you have is an idea of a thing that's not an idea, which makes it an idea. You're trapped in the world of ideas. You can't get outside of that. So from his perspective, the whole notion of a material world beyond the mind is an incoherent notion. It's nonsense. It's literally nonsense. There is no hidden world of material substance lurking behind appearances. The world for Berkeley is mind all the way down. It's mind and ideas. That's the only thing we experience. Therefore, as a good empiricist, Berkeley's going to say that's the only thing we're justified in asserting exists. We have no justification for saying there is anything mind independent because we never experience it. Wherever we're getting that idea from, it's not from experience. So Berkeley's, this position is known as immaterialism or subjective idealism. When I was younger, it was called subjective idealism. These days, it tends to be called immaterialism, I think. Or maybe it was more of a regional thing. I don't know. It seems like the terminology has changed on that. But it's the idea essentially that all that exists are ideas, and ultimately Berkeley is going to sort of expand this out into and everything's that the universe is all thoughts in the mind of God thing, and that's what preserves the continuity of experiences. God is always looking at everything, being an omnipresent consciousness, and that is what maintains the reality of existence. Berkeley's, we're not going to get into detail about that part of Berkeley here, which is kind of too bad. But Berkeley has this famous maxim that summarizes his position, which is esse est percipi. Again, it's Latin, and it translates to be is to be perceived. That's it. To be is to be perceived. If something exists, if we're going to say that something exists, what we're saying is that it is being perceived, that it exists in a consciousness somewhere. And this is empiricism taken to its radical logical conclusion. What you see is literally all you get. You are not justified in making any inferences beyond the immediate experience of your ideas. What is playing on the screen is all there is. It's mind and ideas all the way down. So that's one potential way out of the theater, is to collapse the distinction, right? This immaterialist metaphysics that Berkeley has, it collapses the theater metaphor. Because there's no disconnect between appearance and reality, because there's nothing external to the appearances. The appearances are reality. He's not a skeptic. Berkeley's not a skeptic. He is a realist. He is a realist about experience. He is saying that all there is what we directly experience, and he 100% believes that that is what the word real means. So some people take him to be a skeptic, like he's trying to say that that we can have no knowledge of the real world, or that there is no real world, or something like that. No, he's saying there's a real world. It's exactly what we see. It's exactly the experiences we have, and that it's a mistake to assume that there's some other thing. Locke, from his perspective, is the skeptic. Locke's the one saying that there's this other mysterious stuff out there that we don't know anything about that's making the appearances happen, that the appearances themselves aren't real enough in themselves, that they need this other stuff external to them in order to have reality. I mean, from Berkeley's perspective, Locke's being a sloppy empiricist by postulating material reality external to our appearances. But most people, I think, are not going to follow Berkeley entirely down that road, which is not to say that there aren't idealists around. There are certainly. It's making kind of a comeback lately in certain quarters of metaphysics and philosophy. But I think most people would like to maintain the notion that there is a real world that exists behind our appearances, that the world, just like when we're dreaming, the world doesn't cease to exist when we're asleep. If there's no one looking at a tree, that there's no tree there. I think most of us want there to be a tree there when no one's looking. And Berkeley's solution that, well, the tree is always going to be there because God's always looking at it, that's doesn't work for most people. So while honestly, it's an incredibly strong argument, but it leads to a conclusion that is a little bit too much for most people. So let's look at some other possible solutions, some other potential ways out of the Cartesian theater. Can we find another path out? So I want to consider an idea. Rather than accepting the basic premise that perception is mediated by mental representations of external reality, there is another view that we ought to just reject this representationalist picture entirely, that we need to throw the whole thing out, that it's wrong from the ground up. And this is a position called direct or naive realism. And it's been held by various people throughout sort of the history of this debate. There's a lot of people who hold versions of this belief now. There's a lot of very compelling schools of philosophy, like enactivism, disjunctivism, that are in different ways direct realist theories. So in our readings, D.Z. Phillips is going to kind of represent that in a sort of indirect way. He's going to challenge Russell on the sense data theory. So he agrees with Berkeley, D.Z. Phillips does, that representationalist theories are never going to justify your belief in the external world. You're never going to get to an external world if you accept something like sense data. If you accept that Lockean picture, that Russellian picture of like atomic units of sense data that either do or don't correspond to or match up with an external reality, if you start from that premise, you're locked in the theater forever. You're never getting outside of that thing. You're never going to be able to justify any statement or inference about the external world. You're always only going to be talking about your internal representations if you make the move of saying that there are internal representations. So let's look at that stick in water illusion again. Let's look at the argument from illusion. So we've got the stick. The stick is straight. You stick it in water. Now it looks bent. What's happening there? Well, Phillips is going to argue that that only seems like a problem if you start from the assumption that there is something like a representation that needs to be matched up with something like a thing in itself. If you start with that framework, that conceptual framework, then you have a problem. But that ignores the context in which the perceptual experience is happening, right? Because it's treating it like these individual sort of atoms of sensation that are disconnected from the context of the world, that you can just examine, like this atom of redness, and say, well, here's this atom of redness, and then there is this external apple, and does the atom of redness match up with the atomic structure of the atom in this one-to-one correlation? That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. There is a whole context surrounding any perceptual experience, and it can be what Phillips calls a favorable context, a favorable perceptual set of circumstances, in which case the stick would look straight. It would not be in water. If you want to talk about ideal viewing circumstances for determining the ontological character of a stick, then sticking it halfway into water is not going to be the way to do that. You're going to want to look at a stick that's not in water, that's probably lit in daylight and is clearly visible. If you need glasses like me, you're going to want to be wearing them. You're going to want to, take into account all the different variables that impact the way we see things, because we know that there are variables, right? We know that the context matters. Partial submersion of a stick into water is an unfavorable circumstance for perception for reasons that are known. We know that water refracts light. We know that it distorts straight lines. We understand how the mechanics of water and light interact, and how that interacts with the visual system of humans, with the ways that our sensory organs and the way that the sensory the V1 region of the brain and all of that sort of thing. We know how this story works. We understand the science of why a stick looks bent when you stick it in water. It's not a mystery. It would be a mystery if it didn't look bent, because that would mean we were wrong about how light works when it interacts with water and when that interacts with our visual system. But in fact, according to the science that we have, we fully expect a stick to look bent, a straight stick to appear bent when it's stuck halfway into a body of water. That's not a mystery. That's not something that requires us to create this entire framework of this representational theater to try to explain. What we're doing is inventing a problem where there isn't one. And this honestly, as a perspective I like a lot. I think a lot of the problems in philosophy that come with the appearance-reality distinction can be dissolved if you take context into consideration. It's something, and Phillips is a kind of a weird guy to use to represent this, because it's not really his area that he spends a lot of time on. But he's not the first person to suggest this, and it's a good counter argument. But there are also really good arguments on the representationalist side too. Things like blind sight that strongly imply that there is a disconnection between our representation of the world, that we do have an internal map, a representation of the world that succeeds or fails in matching or corresponding to what actually exists out in the world. So this is still under debate. This is under debate by philosophers. This is under debate by neuroscientists. This is under debate by cognitive scientists. This is a live topic. If anyone, a lot of you I know are in the psych program, and if you're interested in the psychology and the neuroscience of perception, it is a fascinating field. One of my favorite areas, because it always just sends me down a rabbit hole and blows my mind every time. And every time I think I've found a solution to it, I find some piece of evidence that tells me, nope, it's more difficult than that. So, but this suggests another way that we can get outside of the theater. It's just to reject the representationalist picture from the beginning. The whole notion that we're watching that we're experiencing a representation of reality rather than reality itself. This returns us to reality. We are in nature. We're not passive spectators outside of nature looking at this construct. Right, this picture that our mind has created, this image, this film reel, this movie, but we're actually in nature. But if that's right, then we also have a lot of other things that we need to explain adequately. So these are a couple of ways out of the theater. You can dissolve the Cartesian theater by reducing everything to appearance, or you can, which is Berkeley's solution, or you can dissolve the theater by rejecting the notion of there being something like appearances which are separate from reality. So it's sort of a reduction in either direction, or either reducing everything to the appearance, which is Berkeley's move, or reducing everything to the reality, which is Phillips' move here, and the move that direct and naive realists tend to make. But even if we've resolved the Cartesian theater, and we haven't, but even if we had, that's not the only problem that's going on with this sort of Lockean Cartesian picture of the universe. We've got another conceptual hazard lurking out there in the shadows that's threatening to undermine the foundations of what we believe in, of sort of the ground of our entire conceptual scheme. And that's something called the Humean mosaic, which is a modern term that I'm going to appropriate for this to frame this discussion. But nature, the way Locke describes nature, right? It's this dynamic system, right? It's bound together by natural necessity. Objects are something like vital agents. They're doing things. They're straining against one another. There's this push-pull. There's this vibrancy that's happening, this exertion of causal powers, and this endless kind of contest or rivalry. Things are, pushing against each other. Their powers, their possibilities, their causal capacities are straining against one another all the time and trying to make something give. It's very dynamic. There's this hidden machinery of active potentiality that sort of undergirds the whole thing. That everything is driven by this potential to interact with other things, and it's a picture of the universe that's very vibrant. It's like this living, transformative process of becoming, and that's a very appealing picture, I think, to me, and I think to a lot of other people. But it ultimately rests upon two pillars, right? So in order to underwrite that position from a Lockean perspective, what we need is for inductive reasoning to work. We need for inductive reasoning to be a reliable way to acquire true knowledge, and we need for there to actually be something like causal powers that form a necessary connection. And I want you to hold on to that term, necessary connection, between objects and perceptions, right? There's got to be something that really connects things, something that makes it necessarily the case that things are connected by general universal laws. These twin foundations, inductive reasoning and necessary connection, ensure that we inhabit a universe that's bound together by comprehensible forces that we can understand. It's grounded in universal laws. We can derive laws from these principles, and we can we can comprehend this, we can access it, we can investigate it through careful observation, through science, through inductive reasoning. We can do experiments, and we can trust that the results of those experiments are going to tell us something real about the universe. And one by one, the Scottish philosopher David Hume is going to tear all of this down. He's going to bring the whole house of cards of inductive reasoning and necessary connection down. He is the great destroyer of the early modern period, and sort of represents an inflection point in the history of ideas and the evolution of ideas and philosophy and beyond, and in science, and etc. It's a hugely influential turning point in the history, because this is stuff that people were not really being critical of until Hume comes along and just demolishes everything. So what do we have left? If you tear down inductive reasoning and necessary connection, if you tear down causation and induction, then what do you have left? What's left of the universe? And the philosopher David Lewis, and we're going to read him in a different context later on, but this is actually one of the things he's more well known for. He's going to say that what's left is a universe that is nothing but, in his words, a vast mosaic of local matters of particular fact, just one little thing and another. That's what we're going to have left. Lewis calls this the Humean mosaic, and I'm going to go into more detail about what that means and why it should unsettle us. So in the Humean mosaic, nature is fragmented into this disconnected succession of isolated moments. Because there are no necessary connections, right? There's only accidental regularity. There's no necessity connecting one moment to another. They just happen to be, to occur. They just happen to occur, one thing after another. It's just one little thing after another, and that's all there is to it. There's a regularity of what Hume calls constant conjunction, which is things that occur one after the other, that tend to occur together. And we've observed this thing happens and then this other thing happens. And we make inferences based on that, but Hume's going to argue that we're not justified in making those inferences. So what we have are unmoored events. They're not held together by anything. They're scattered haphazardly just across in this inert space-time backdrop. There's no dynamism, there's no necessary connection, there's no vivacity, nothing is moving, nothing is connected, nothing is alive and interacting. It's all just this distribution of events, both across space and across time. There's nothing connecting them. They just happen to be that way. There's no intrinsic connection, there's no necessity, there's no meaning. The world is a constellation of orphaned moments. Orphaned moments touching but never actually connecting. They just happens to be, it just so happens that events are distributed this way. Causation in this picture is something like a ghost, a specter. It's not a intrinsic force of nature, it's a psychological habit. The mind's expectation that observed patterns are going to continue to persist through time, right? Well, we have this expectation that things are going to continue to recur, that when we occur something happening again and again and again, that's going to keep happening. And Hume's going to say, you know, you actually don't have a good justification for that. That what you have is a desperate and unjustified attempt to impose a comforting sense of order onto a reality of what is ultimately indifferent chaos. And this is a worldview that is fatal to science, fatal to scientific knowledge. And to understand why that is, we're gonna look at Hume's empiricist epistemology in some detail. And that's one of the keys here, is that Hume's destruction of Locke's worldview is undertaken, is accomplished by using Locke's own tools. He uses Lockean empiricism to tear down Lockean empiricism. Hume is an empiricist, even though he's using empiricism to essentially dismantle empiricism. And how he does that is through something called Hume's fork. He has a lot of things named after him. He's got a fork, he's got a guillotine. I'm sure he has other things, other implements. Yeah, there's Hume is huge. And a lot of Hume, I buy into. The Humean mosaic, I think, is something that is a challenge that needs to be overcome. And we're gonna investigate whether that is the case. And maybe you don't agree with me. Maybe you think that it's okay that this is the Humean mosaic is a good picture of the universe, and like a dynamic, processual, Lockean, powerful universe is the bad one. And if so, by all means, make that argument. And that's what we're here to do. So, like Locke, Hume develops this taxonomy of mental content, right? Locke, if you'll recall, he divides everything into sensations and reflections. All knowledge is decomposable into sensations and reflections. Sensations are the representational images that are generated by the powers of objects, right? The primary and secondary quality thing. Reflections are the operations that our minds perform using these simple sensations, how we combine the simple sensations and make complex ideas out of them. So Hume is going to take this analysis further. He's going to go beyond Locke here. And he's going to distinguish between what he calls impressions and ideas. Impressions are the vivid and immediate experiences that we get directly from both the world and internal events. So they're strong, they're vivacious, they're immediate. When something happens, you're driving and you have a near miss in traffic, and that seems very vivid. That seems very alive and powerful at the moment. It takes all of your attention is focused on that. It's a very vivacious and powerful and forceful image that imprints itself upon you. And then later on, assuming that you don't have serious trauma as a result of it, you're able to recall it, you're able to bring it to mind, but it doesn't have that same force and power anymore. It's a little fainter, it's a little paler, it's a little less impactful, and these faint copies, these reflections, these shadows of impressions that we can recall through memory and imagination, humans going to call ideas. And ideas are going to be the things that we work on, and when we combine and compare and sort of build up again complex ideas out of simple ones, that's going to be generally our ideas of things. But these are recollections that are based in impressions, and that's the important move here. Is that all concepts, everything that's in your head, everything that's in your brain, everything that's in your mind, ultimately has its source in a direct impression. Something forcefully impressed itself upon you in this way, in some kind of way. And if a concept has no corresponding impression, if there is no experience that you can connect a concept to, that you can trace it back to, then it's meaningless. You don't have any justification in asserting that concept. It's not based on experience. And again, Hume's an empiricist. So all knowledge is going to cash out ultimately in experience. Now, concepts that are derived from impressions, Hume is going to say, are further subdivided into two distinct categories. And those categories are relations of ideas and matters of fact, which sounds more complicated than it is because it is really just what it says on the tin. Relations of ideas are statements that are true by definition or logical necessity, such as mathematical truths or logical tautologies. A tautology is when you basically say the same thing twice. It's when the predicate restates the subject, like we'll get into that. The important thing is that relations of ideas are literally, you take ideas in Hume's sense and you relate them together using logical operations. You put them together and you come up with concepts based on that. These are going to be certain. These are going to provide certainty for you, right? Because their denial would involve a logical contradiction. This is, again, like math and logic. That the math and logic provide, specifically logic, provides the rules of inference that allow you to relate ideas. That's what the relation part of the relation of ideas is. But the thing is, they tell us nothing new about the world, because we're just applying logical operations to ideas, and we already know what the logical operations do. There's no new information to be had that way, right? Relations of ideas are very similar, you might have noticed, to the notion of a priori deductive reasoning that we talked about in Module 2. And we're going to sort of pick up on that thread too. Matters of fact are the other categories. So relations of ideas and matters of fact. Matters of fact are matters of fact, facts about the world. They're statements that are true by they are empirical claims. Matters of fact are empirical claims about the world that could, logically speaking, be false, right? They give us new information, but they lack absolute certainty. And they're similar to the a posteriori inductive reasoning that we studied in Module 2. So this is very similar to the a priori, a posteriori distinction that we talked about in the previous module, in Module 2. So, relations of ideas are statements that are true by definition, and denying them would involve a logical contradiction. Matters of fact are empirical claims about the world based on observation and evidence that are possible to be false. They can be disproven, but their advantage is they give us new information, which is something that relations of ideas can't, because relations of ideas are just plugging ideas into these logical, formal logical relationships. Now, this division between relations of ideas and matters of facts is what's known as Hume's fork. And it's called a fork because it's got the two tines, right? It's like a fork that's only got two tines, two pointy bits. And one of them is the relation of ideas, and one of them is a matter of fact. And if a statement is neither an a priori relation of ideas, nor is it and a posteriori matter of fact. If it doesn't fit on one of the two tines of the fork, then that statement is meaningless. Hume, I'm going to quote Hume here because it's a great quotation, and it's always quoted. Hume is very quotable. If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number, which would be relations of ideas? No. Well, does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matters of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. So take all your books of divinity, of scholastic metaphysics, and toss them into the fire, because they are not based on either logical relations that hold between ideas or on experience derived from observation of the world. And if it's not one of those two things, Hume is going to ask you, well, where are you getting it from? If it's not coming from logic, and it's from a priori deductive logic, if it's, relations of ideas, and if it's not coming from experience of the world, inductive reasoning based on observations of regularities in nature, then where exactly is that knowledge coming from? Or is this thing that you're calling knowledge coming from? He's going to say that it's coming from nowhere. It's meaningless. Toss it into the fire. The implications, it turns out, of Hume's fork are pretty devastating. As Russell notes, Bertrand Russell, back again to explain old philosophical ideas in modern accessible language. Our belief in the explanatory power of science, right? Something we want to hold on to, right? It's ultimately grounded in our belief in what Russell calls the uniformity of nature. And that is the belief, as Russell puts it, that everything that has happened or will happen in the universe is an instance of some general law without exception. That means we want to say that these regularities that we observe inductively in nature tell us something about the actual way nature is, that they're telling us something about how the world functions. It's this fundamental belief in the uniformity of nature, and this notion of natural law, that underwrites all of our basic inductive inferences, and therefore science. And as an example, Russell is going to use the observation that the sun has risen in the morning every day of your life. Every day in the life of everyone you know, every day in the life of recorded history, the sun has risen in the morning. So it is a valid inductive inference based on that data set to say that I believe that the sun will rise in the morning tomorrow. I believe that the fact that it has risen every day in the past justifies me saying that the sun will probably rise in the morning. That's probably a representation of a universal law, a uniformity of nature. That the way nature is structured is such that given the relative positions and forces, gravitation, etc., orbits of the Earth and Sun, that if all that remains the same, the Earth, the Sun is going to rise in the morning. That is something like a natural law demonstrating uniformity in nature. The past, we can expect the future to resemble the past, is what this ultimately comes down to. That when we observe something happening again and again and again with no exception, there's never an exception to it. The sun always rises. There wasn't some weird day back in the 70s when the sun didn't rise and everyone got the day off. The sun has, as far as we know, every day that there has been humans recording this sort of thing, there has been a rising of the sun, without exception. And we want to say that from that data set, we can infer that there are some universal laws, there is some uniformity to nature being implied by this. But Hume's going to say, well, okay, so what are you justifying that on? What underwrites that? So you believe that the future will resemble the past, right? So is it a relation of ideas? Is there a logical contradiction that's going to happen if I say that the sun is not going to rise tomorrow? It doesn't seem to be. That doesn't seem to be something that you work out logically, right? It's not like math. I can't just plug an equation in. I mean, I suppose I could, there are physical equations, of course, but those are based on observations. Those are matters of fact, right? It's not sort of pure mathematics like a square has four sides, where, you know, having four sides is part of the definition of what a square is. It's a contradiction to say that there is if you say there's a square with three sides, you're talking nonsense. You don't know what a square is if you say that. The sun won't rise tomorrow isn't that kind of statement, right? It's, you know, you can understand what all the words in that sentence mean and still say it and be saying something meaningful. You may be wrong, but you're not speaking, you know, incoherent gibberish. You're not voicing a logical contradiction. So it's not a relation of ideas. So that means it must be a matter of fact, right? Well, it's a matter of fact that you've observed the sun rising in the past, but it's not a matter of fact that you've observed the sun rising in the future, because it turns out you can't see the future. The future is in the future. It hasn't happened yet. You can't observe things that haven't happened yet. So it's not actually a matter of fact that the sun will rise in the future either. We are inferring that the sun will rise because we have observed it rising every day in the past, which is to say that we are assuming that the future will continue to resemble the past. And why do we assume that? Well, we assume that the future will continue to resemble the past because so far the future has always resembled the past. And that's a problem. That is not how this works. You cannot justify an inductive claim by an appeal to induction. You can't say that the future will continue to resemble the past because the future has always resembled the past in the past. That's circular reasoning. That is, again, another example of begging the question. You are assuming the conclusion that you set out to prove. You're smuggling the conclusion into the premise. You are just being tautological here. You're not saying anything meaningful. It begs the question. We cannot justify our belief in inductive reasoning based upon a further appeal to inductive reasoning. That is Hume's problem of induction. That it turns out our belief in induction is based on induction. And that is not how this is supposed to work. But Hume's just getting warmed up here. He's just getting started. So what's happening, according to Hume, is that our belief in induction actually rests upon a deeper belief that events are connected to one another by a relationship of causal necessity. And this is that necessary connection again. This is the other pillar of sort of Lockean picture of the universe that Hume's going to tear down. So, so we have this belief in that the sun will continue to rise because we understand how things cause other things, right? It's not just based on this, you know, just because it's always happened before. It's like we understand that there are certain effects that follow certain causes because there's, you know, the forces, gravitational forces. You have, you know, the relationship, the relative, you know, distance between the two bodies and all the sort of Newtonian mechanics surrounding that. But when we try to trace back why we believe in causation, Hume's going to ask, okay, so does that come from an actual impression from experience? Remember that all meaningful ideas have to be based in impressions? That we have to actually experience a thing in order to be justified in asserting it? That's where we get the ideas that then we plug into the relation of ideas, right? From experience. He's an empiricist. Again, it's all coming from experience. So Hume doesn't think so. He doesn't think that we observe what we think we observe. And he's going to give the example of two billiard balls, which is two pool balls in a game of pool, right? You've got two pool balls, two billiard balls. They crash into each other, and you know, one slams into the other flies off, and you know, hits the end of the pool table. And what we want to say is that the first ball caused the second ball to move by hitting it. And that's, that's your sort of archetypical example of a causal event. This event A caused event B. This thing happened, and then this other thing happened, and the first thing made the second thing happen because of something called causation. And Hume's going to be like, wait a second here. What you actually saw. If we're going to be like real about this, if you drop someone who didn't already have a notion of causation in their head into this situation, and they were just observing for the first time this event of two billiard balls crashing into each other, what they would see and what they would describe themselves as seeing is, well, this thing happened, and then this other thing happened. That's it. I didn't see any necessary connection there. I saw one event and then another event. That's it. That's all experience gives us. One thing after another. Over time, and this is how we build up this idea, because we don't get causation. What Hume's getting at here is that we don't get the actual notion of causal necessity from our observations. We see a thing happen, and then we see another thing happen. And then we see it happen again. We see this pattern of regularity, where event A is followed by event B, and all the circumstances that we've experienced. The sun always rises in the morning. Swans are always white, except when they're not, because there are black swans. So you cannot rule that out. And again, this is a problem that's known with inductive reasoning, but Hume really just weaponizes it and turns it into something devastating. So all we experience are what he calls the constant conjunction of one type of event with another. We observe a pattern of regularity, but we never actually observe the necessary connection. This mysterious thing called causation that's supposed to tie all this stuff together, that's supposed to be the glue holding the universe together, we have never actually seen. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know what we're talking about. We can't trace it back to an impression. It's not a relation of ideas, and it's not something that is a matter of fact because we don't observe it. And it can't be a relation of ideas because ideas are drawn from impressions, and we have no impression of causation. What we are doing is basically describing a habit that we have. We've always seen these two things happen one after the other, and we feel like there's something else that has to be going on there underneath. Some hidden, mysterious thing, some principle. We know not what. We don't know what it looks like. We can't describe it because we've never seen it, but it's got to be there because the swans are always white, because the sun always rises, because event B always follows event A. And Hume's going to say that's not good enough. That doesn't actually justify what you think it does. The necessary connection we imagine between cause and effect is not based on any impression. It's not something that we perceive. It's just a habit of mind, a psychological association formed through repeated experience. That's all it is. Causation isn't something in the world. It's the way that our minds organize experiences. We're describing our own mind, our own experience. We're not talking about the world when we talk about causation. The world is just events. The world is just the mosaic. And all this talk of connection, of causation, of necessity, that is talk about how our minds have become habituated to organize this distribution of regularity, this constant conjunction. And with this, and again, this is he's using Locke's tools here. This is a Lockean appeal to experience, and Hume just takes it and demolishes the empirical foundations for both induction and causation. And this is, we've sort of breezed through it here, but this is an incredibly powerful argument, and it's worth, it's a short course, but like, at some point in your life, if you have a moment to sit down and like really sort of think your way through what Hume's doing here, he is doing something really profound and impressive. And he calls into question the entire justification for scientific knowledge by this move. And what we're left with is the mosaic, the Humean mosaic, a world of unconnected events from which we irrationally infer that there is some ordered and predictable uniformity in nature, some meaning underlying all of this, something that ties it all together. But that's based on nothing more than a habit of mind. That tells us something about the way we think, not about the way the world is. And this is going to be kind of upsetting to a lot of people. And one of the people that it's going to upset is a guy named Immanuel Kant. And that's going to be important, because that is going to change the direction of philosophy and the direction of thought and the way we understand our relationship to the world. And we're still wrestling with the fallout from what Hume did here. So we've got this. We were telling the story of early modern philosophy, right? It begins with Descartes. He's got this quest for certainty, for epistemic certainty, and that just leads us to the Cartesian theater. That leads us to the conclusion that we're an immaterial spectator watching this sort of representational film strip of reality that we can't get outside of, and we can't compare it to reality itself. Reality itself is forever inaccessible to us. We're left with skepticism about the very existence of an external world, right? And then we're led to the Humean mosaic, which is skepticism about the very possibility of scientific knowledge. This whole attempt to ground knowledge and certainty seems to have just made us more uncertain about things. We are left with more questions than we started out with. We are less certain about things than we were at the beginning. And this problem, especially the skepticism about causation, is what jolted this German philosopher Immanuel Kant, and we're going to be reading him later again in the module on ethics. Possibly the most influential philosopher. He's like up there with Plato and Aristotle, definitely. And I think he might be the most cited philosopher, like, since they've been tracking citations in journals and publications. Like, over the course of the history of philosophy, people talked about Kant a lot, and are still talking about him. And Hume jolted him from what he called his dogmatic slumber, which he was taking an intellectual nap where he thought the world made sense. And then Hume comes along and just like kicks the foundations out from under reality, and Kant is like, oh, okay. Yeah, I got to do something about this. So the thing is, Hume's arguments are convincing to Kant. Hume's argument that we can't locate causation in the world. Kant thinks Hume is right about that. Yet, for us to make some sort of sense out of the world, for something like an experience to be possible in the first place, there has to be some organizing principle, right? That allows events to be arranged into a comprehensible sequence. If it's all just chaos, if there's no connections, if it's just this random scattering of events, just one thing after another, then we can't even build an experience out of this. The possibility of thinking goes away. I mean, the fact that we're able to formulate the argument against causation seems to imply that there's some sort of framework in place that allows us to be able to structure those concepts. So Kant that's gonna be his entry point into this. That's the thing he's gonna dig into. The conditions for the possibility of knowledge. And he writes a book, he investigates this question, a book called The Critique of Pure Reason, probably the most influential philosophy book possibly ever written. Also one of the most difficult works ever written. Kant is a terrible writer. He's a great thinker, but a terrible communicator. So luckily there are a ton of people who are better writers than Kant who write about Kant, and who can tell you what he's up to. So part of what he's going to do here is he's going to merge empiricism and rationalism together. He's going to heal that schism. And he's going to bring the early modern period to a close by doing that, because the early modern period was really defined by the schism between the rationalists and the empiricists. And if you've been following this narrative, you've probably had this suspicion the whole time that they're both kind of right, that both of them have a piece of the puzzle. It is partly about, I mean, there do seem to be ideas, innate ideas that we do not derive from experience, but certainly not all ideas are like that. Certainly experience, we get a lot from that. Our senses, we are not being systemically deceived about everything by an evil demon. Our senses are telling us something true about the world. There's something to both positions. So Kant is going to bring those together. He wants to preserve both of those intuitions. And this is going to be a very quick and surface level account of Kant because he's extremely difficult. So prior to Kant, philosophy was primarily concerned with trying to make the mind conform to the world. The idea is that reality is out there, and the job of philosophy is to figure out how to make our concepts match reality, the whole correspondence theory. But Kant's going to do something where he flips the table. He is going to reverse the polarity on that. Just like Copernicus reversed the notion that we had going back to Aristotle, that the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun revolved around the Earth and all of that. And Copernicus is like, no, if you do the math, then it turns out the sun is the center of our solar system and the Earth revolves around the sun. And then Galileo is going to build a big microscope and verify. It's like, yep, Copernicus was right. And the Catholic Church is going to be like, you can't say that. But the thing is, Copernicus reversed the entire picture we had of the way the universe works. Like the move from geocentrism to heliocentrism, the switch from the Earth being the center of the universe to the sun being the center of the solar system, which itself is just one among many solar systems, among many galaxies, etc., was a complete upending of our entire picture of how the universe worked. It was a radical change in, it's like one of those duck-rabbit pictures where it looks like a duck and then suddenly it turns into a rabbit. It's this perspective shift where suddenly we see the world in a completely different light. And Kant's going to do this with the fit from mind to world. And he calls it his Copernican revolution for this reason. And he's going to get there by asking a very simple, but it turns out very important question, which is what conditions make knowledge possible in the first place? What must exist for experience to occur? What are the conditions for the possibility of knowledge? And he's going to explore that. He's going to try to build out this sort of anatomy of the architecture of the mind, of how the mind needs to be in order for experience to be possible. What needs to be the case in order for us to even have an experience in the first place, to be asking these questions. And he's going to do that through an analysis of the structure of language, which is also going to be methodologically very significant, because looking at language and analyzing language to try to figure out how the mind works is going to be a major project for philosophy following Kant. And he really sort of sets the stage for that here. And also, what he's making is a transcendental argument, which is also going to be hugely influential. He's not just asking what's the case. He's asking, well, what has to be already the case in order for us to ask the question? What are the conditions for the possibility of asking this question in the first place? And that's a transcendental question, because we're stepping back from the question and we're looking at, okay, well, how does the world have to be for me to even think this? And to get there, he's going to get really deep into linguistic analysis with the analytic, synthetic split in propositions and the notion of the synthetic a priori. This gets technical. I'll tell you the parts that you need to know for the. I'm going to give you it's kind of a whirlwind tour through Kant here, but hang on, and I will tell you the parts that you'll be graded on. So they're going to be needed for the assignments. So Kant begins by distinguishing between two types of judgments, by which he basically means statements here. There's analytic propositions, right, which are logical tautologies. What does that mean? I said we were going to come back to logical tautologies, and here we are. An analytic proposition is a proposition in which the subject is contained within the predicate. And what is the subject and predicate here? Let's look at the classic example here. All bachelors are unmarried men. So in this, bachelors is the subject, unmarried men is the predicate. You know, X, all X are Y. So Y is describing X. It's the predicate that describes the subject. It's supposed to describe. That's the way propositions work. You know, all apples are red. All of this is that. All bachelors are unmarried men. The thing with the statement of all bachelors are unmarried men is that unmarried men means exactly the same thing as bachelor. That's just a restatement. All the predicate does is restate the subject. You get nothing new from that. You're not saying anything new. You're not adding anything to the subject by adding on the predicate unmarried men to the subject bachelor. You're just saying the same thing in different words. All bachelors are unmarried men is the same thing as saying all bachelors are bachelors. All unmarried men are unmarried men. It's just a repetition. That's what a tautology is. A tautology is basically when you restate the subject and the predicate, or the subject is contained within the predicate, is the more technical way of saying that. So that's to be contrasted with synthetic statements. And Kant is the first one to propose this distinction, by the way. This is building off of the a priori, a posteriori distinction, which was already in place. And that was assumed to be like ground zero, the bottom layer of this analysis, and Kant's going to go deeper. So what's a synthetic statement? A synthetic statement is what Kant's going to call ampliative, which means it adds new information. So the predicate amplifies the subject. So to take an example, all bachelors are unhappy. Well, that's a synthetic statement, because unhappy does not mean the same thing as bachelor. It is possible for bachelors to be happy. As a married man, I am sympathetic to the notion that, I won't say that all bachelors are unhappy, but I think I'm happier. But the point is that unhappy isn't just a restatement of bachelor. It adds something new. It expands the concept. It adds new information. And what Kant's going to do, his big innovation here with what he's doing with language, is he's going to identify a new category. Because there was this assumption before that all analytic propositions were a priori, that they were all statements that were true, deductively true without appeal to experience, and all synthetic statements were a posteriori, that if you want to know if all bachelors are unhappy, you got to go out in the world and meet some bachelors and get yourself a data set of bachelors and determine whether or not they're happy, and then that's how you find that out. You have to investigate. You go to experience. Kant's going to say there's a third category, the synthetic a priori, statements that add new information and are therefore synthetic, yet can be known with certainty prior to experience and are thus a priori. This is something that was thought impossible prior to Kant. In fact, I don't even think anyone even considered doing it before Kant. And his critical move here, the way he's going to respond to Hume and sort of everything that follows from his response to Hume, is going to be based in a demonstration that statements like every event has a cause represent examples of synthetic a priori judgments. That's the bit you got to know, by the way. Every event has a cause is what he's trying to establish here. That's the thing that Hume problematizes. That's the thing that Hume denies, that causation refers to anything, at least in the philosophical sense, refers to anything that we actually experience, or anything that we are justified in asserting. And Hume agrees that causation is not something that we derive from experience, but he thinks that it's still something that gives new information about the world and therefore is not a meaningless statement. He is trying to make causation meaningful again. He is trying to save causation from Hume's fork. Hume's got his fork and he's trying to stab causation and induction, and Kant's going to try to save them through this synthetic a priori. So the way he's going to do that, to demonstrate the synthetic a priori reasoning, and we're going to be really quick, this is Kant's transcendental deduction, which is a huge, complicated thing, and we're just going to touch on it very lightly. He's going to start out with some examples from mathematics, right? So to grasp geometric truths of geometry, right? About shape and position, dimension, that sort of thing. In order for us to be able to think about geometry, we already have to have a notion of space, right? For things to have a shape, to have position and dimension, then that implies that there's a background of a spatial framework within which notions like shape, like dimension, like position can make sense. We have to have what Kant calls a pure intuition of space already in order to make sense of geometrical knowledge, geometrical reasoning. And he's going to do the same thing with arithmetic, with notions like 5 plus 7 equals 12. Let's just pluck a simple piece of math of addition. So if we're talking about 5 plus 7, we're talking about a sequence, a numerical sequence here, where we're sequencing numbers and combining them in an orderly progression. In order to, we start out with the 5, we add the 7, we get the 12. So we have to have this framework already, this scaffolding, this conceptual scaffolding in the background, this intuition of time, of duration, that has to already exist for the notion of adding a number to another number to make sense. Because this presupposes, and again, Kant's big questions here. Big question: what are the conditions for the possibility of an experience? What are the conditions for the possibility of knowledge? What has to already be the case in order for us to be able to think these things? And he's going to say that space and time have to already exist as fundamental intuitions structuring our consciousness. Our ability to perceive the world has to already be filtered through this structure of space and time in order for us to make sense of things like mathematics, like geometry and arithmetic. These are the conditions for the possibility of mathematical knowledge. And he's going to take that and he's going to extend it to causation. How is he going to do that? He's going to say that in the case of causation, too, there has to be an organizing principle, what he calls a category of understanding. Kant's categories, Kant's cats. And that has to be imposed by consciousness. We're not talking about things out in the world here. We're talking about the structure of mind. We're talking about the way mind has to be already in order for us to have an experience. This is the way minds have to already be organized. This is what it means to have a mind. So, events unfold within the flow of time. And mind, it applies causality like a sort of binding element, so that instead of just like mere succession, we have something like a meaningful experience. Each moment follows from its predecessor with a necessity. We have to be, so if everything is just this Humean distribution of events that are unconnected, we can't make meaning out of it. We can't make sense out of that. We have to have this causal framework already in place. We have to have a category that organizes things into a meaningful sequence in order for us to make sense of questions like what is causation, or are we justified in postulating causation as a real thing? And Kant's answer is going to be it's not out there in the world. Hume's right. Causation, space, and time are not things out there in the world, which is actually going farther than Hume. Hume wasn't questioning space and time, but Kant's gonna, in order to save causation, he is going to take space, time, and causation and take them out of the external world and say that these are not elements of the world in itself. These are the ways our mind structures information. This is the scaffolding that has to be in place regarding the way our consciousness organizes information. It has to be this framework of space, time, and causation has to already be built in order for us to make sense of our experience of the world, in order for us to be able to comprehend one thing happening after another, for experience to make sense. We have to already have this notion of space, of time, of sequence, of causation, of connection between events in order. These are the conditions for the possibility of knowledge. So each moment follows from its predecessor with a necessity that stems not from the world itself, but from the mind that perceives it. A necessity no less universal. And that's the thing. When we talk about these being mental categories, we're not saying that they're subjective. We're not saying that it's just a subjective experience. I mean, causation, space, time, that's just the way you think about things, man. That's not true. That's not like a universal truth. No, Kant's going to say that's universal. That's the way every mind has to be a mind. This is what it means to have a mind, is that if you are going to have a mind that is capable of asking these sorts of questions, then it is going to need to be structured with these frameworks of cause, of time, and of space, etc. He's got more. We're just dealing with a small subset here. They have to already be in place in order for that to be possible. So they are universal and they are true. Causation is true. Space is true. Time is true. These represent universal truths, but they're universal truths about the way minds work. That's what they're telling us. They're not telling us anything about the world. And this is ultimately Kant's response to Hume, that for knowledge to be possible at all, there must first be universally true conditions that structure our mind's ability to comprehend things. Space, time, causation, these are necessary frameworks without which the world would be an incomprehensible chaos. But there's a price. There's always a price, right? And this comes down to a distinction that Kant makes between what he calls phenomena and noumena. Phenomena represents the ordered content of mind. So when we talk about structured experience that makes sense, that's comprehensible because it is filtered through this framework of space, time, and causation, that's phenomena. We know that. I mean, we know universal truths about that. Kant's he's just told them to you. That space, time, and causation have to be in place. So we know that those are universally true. But they're not in the world itself. The world itself doesn't have space, time, and causation as properties. And that means we can't comprehend it. The structure of our mind is limited and bound. Its horizon is determined by these concepts. These concepts allow us to experience things, but they also lock us out of the world. All we can experience is our categorical organization, the structure that we impose upon the world, that our minds, the way that our minds structure experience is all we can experience. The world as it is in itself, that's the noumena, that's the unknowable, that's the outside. It's not just unknown. This is not like Russell's sort of appearance reality distinction, where it's like, well, do we know if the apple is really red? Do we know that appearances match reality? And Kant's not saying that there's this potential occasional mismatch. He's saying reality is something radically other. It's something that is completely different from what we experience. What we experience is something that is a necessary construct in order for us to be able to comprehend things. Things in themselves are outside of that structure, and by definition, we cannot access them. And there's a certain sense to this, right? When we think about the evolutionary story, right? That we evolved on this one particular planet in order to survive and to reproduce and to do these sorts of things. We did not evolve to understand things like quantum mechanics or the singularity at the center of a black hole, things that are extraordinarily massive or extraordinarily tiny or moving extraordinarily fast at the speed of light, or extraordinarily slow in magnitude, like the development, the growth of the universe, the expansion of the universe. These things stretch our ability of comprehension because we are one particular species of creature that evolved with a specific kind of mind to navigate a specific kind of environment. And there was no need for us to developed thought about the speed of light and quantum uncertainty. That we have been able to figure out as much as we have about those things is pretty amazing, given the limitations of us as sort of biological creatures. And that's a naturalizing of Kant's position here. Kant's not telling that story. Kant is telling a story about what has to be the case as far as the structure of thought in order for thinking to occur, what it means for thinking to occur, what sort of conditions are necessary for us to think about things in the first place. And I'm talking about the evolutionary picture to say that the notion, and we know that there are things that we don't know. We know that there are colors we can't perceive, that bees, for example, can, that a mantis shrimp can see that we can't. We know that there are sounds that a dog can hear that we can't. There is a universe of smells that a dog inhabits that are beyond what our sense organs and brain architecture have evolved to parse, to comprehend. We know that there's a world of experience beyond what we have access to. And Kant is sort of going beyond even that and saying that it's not just that there's like more colors out there than what we can see. It's that beyond the categories of perception lies something that is so alien that we cannot even begin to comprehend it, because the categories that we use to organize experience don't apply there. It's the outside, in capital O, outside. The other, the radically other. We can't even know what we don't know about it. It is utterly incomprehensible, in the sort of Lovecraftian sense almost. And this is Kant's transcendental idealism. And I'm not going to sort of get into the details of why it's called that, which saves causation and metaphysical knowledge from Hume's flames. He was trying to toss all the books into the fire if they didn't fit on the fork. But in doing so, to get there, Kant is going to exile ultimate reality beyond the boundaries of intelligibility. And this Copernican revolution is going to completely change the picture of philosophy moving forward. Part of how it does this is that the shift is that we're no longer trying to make our minds match the world. Now we are suddenly faced with this question, well, how do we make the world match our minds? How do we have these mental categories, right? We have this way that our mind is structured that determines what we're able to perceive, what we're able to understand, what we're able to experience. How does the world fit into that structure? So it's a radical upending and reversing of the very concept of what knowledge and philosophy mean. And it's going to set the stage for modern philosophy in a lot of different ways. And we're going to talk about one of them to wrap things up here. And that's the sort of move from knowledge as something that we discover, that we read off the face of reality, to knowledge as something that we construct, something that we create, that we are an agent that has a creative role in producing. So Kant's Copernican revolution reverses Western thought's polarity. What philosopher John Searle, who we will read in Module 4 in a bit about AI, might call its direction of fit, which comes from the philosophy of intentionality. I'm not going to get into that. Where philosophers from Socrates to Locke thought they wanted to adapt the mind to the world, Kant demonstrates that the world has to be made to conform to the structure of the mind. And if the mind actively constructs reality rather than just passively receiving it, right? Because that's what we're saying, is that the mind is creative. The mind is constructing reality. It's not just a passive receiver that is being imprinted upon by this forceful external reality that Locke and Hume are talking about. The mind is an active agent that constructs reality. It's a participant in the creation of reality. So if mind actively constructs reality than just passively receiving it, then knowledge transcends mere apprehension. Knowledge isn't just something that we, that nature forces upon us. Knowledge is a kind of power. It reshapes the world in its own image. Yet this is going to go beyond Kant, because Kant is still presuming something like a universal cognitive structure, something that is the nature of all minds and that's common to all rational beings. And subsequent philosophers are going to challenge this, and they're going to challenge that universality, and they're going to do this by noting that the universal subject of the Western philosophical tradition suspiciously always seems to mirror the values of historically dominant groups. The people who were at the table, who were talking about this stuff, who were allowed in the conversation, which tended to be economically privileged white males. It tended to be white guys in positions of economic privilege who were having these discussions and deciding, well, it turns out the universe conforms to my preconceptions of rationality and based on my experience. So philosophers are going to start asking the question in the 20th and 21st centuries, do different contexts, experiences, and social positions produce fundamentally different kinds of knowledge? And this question transforms epistemology from the sort of armchair theoretical pursuit of philosophers into a political project that has actual real-world consequences. So this is how epistemology begins to hook onto the world and be something not just for philosophers to theorize about, but something that has political power and agency. And actual knowers aren't Cartesian, disconnected, disembodied, immaterial subjects in a theater. We tend to inhabit bodies. We tend to be embodied. We tend to have genders. We tend to have histories. We tend to be embedded in social hierarchies. We have a context. We're embedded. We're situated. We're embodied. We're here. We're fleshy. We're messy. We're always already thrown into the midst of things. We're not just rational, free-floating Cartesian minds disconnected from everything. So in this final section, we're going to examine some critiques of the detached Cartesian observer from Janet Kurani and Uma Narayan. And we're going to sort of situate that within feminist standpoint epistemology's critique, broader critique of the sort of Western philosophical tradition. This is going to be a thread that runs through our various readings through different philosophers that I think is important because it's a counterpoint to the story we're telling, and the story we're telling is again the story of how ideas, fundamental ideas that have shaped Western thought, of how they developed, of where they came from, and where they came from was guys like Descartes, Locke, Hume, Berkeley, and Kant. And Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and you might notice some commonalities among these names. They are all sort of dead white guys, and that leaves a lot of people out of the conversation. And we are just now sort of getting around to recognizing that and trying to remedy it. And by just now, this is a project that's been going on for decades, but an important one, and it's important to have that counterpoint so that we don't get trapped into just thinking that this is the only way that we can tell this story. So one of the things that they're going to problematize, Kurani specifically, is science, is our view of science. So science occupies this privileged position with regards to the production of knowledge. We tend to imagine scientists as these kind of paragons of objectivity, right? They're dispassionate excavators of truth. They're out there with the view from nowhere, with the God's eye view. They're not bringing their agendas to the table. They're trying to discover the pure truth of things. But in fact, if you stick around academia long enough, you're going to notice that there is a context within which science happens. And that context is determined by politics involving things like institutional funding, what experiments get money to be performed and which ones don't, who gets denied funding, the culture of academic publishing. If you want your results, let's say you get the funding for the results, if no one will publish them, they're not getting out there. They're not getting included in the discussion, the discourse of science. They are getting ignored and lost, and this has happened many, many times. And it's happened disproportionately to women scientists who we are retroactively realizing discovered things a long time ago that we are just now getting around to. And we're going to look at a specific case in Module 4 of a critique of Descartes that was made in his lifetime by a woman, but then ignored for like centuries until it was resurrected in the 1960s. Anyway, so there's this framework that's in place. You've got the politics of funding. You've got the culture of academic publishing. They don't like to publish null results. They want to see results. If you do an experiment and it demonstrates that nothing happens, that's not exciting. Your readership doesn't go up. People don't click on that article. And there's also the demand for technological progress. People want to know that this is going to advance technology and thus make them money. Or it's going to facilitate some sort of practical, pragmatic outcome. This sort of goes back to Russell's critique of determining everything on the basis of the pragmatics of productivity. And these are the factors. This is the background within which science happens. And as Kareny notes, understanding science requires attending to both its empirical content, and what that means, what we're talking about empirical content in this sense, is the economic and political framework that determines research funding, right? The actual facts of how scientists work, how science actually happens, the actual facts surrounding the laboratory, like what gets people in the laboratory and who pays them, how the money for these things emerges. And we're also going to have to look at the normative dimensions of it, the normative content, and that involves the values, and we're going to talk more about that in the module on ethics that informs scientific goals. So the people that are funding this, why are they funding it? What do they want to happen as a result of these experiments? What biases do the scientists bring to the table that they might not even be aware of? Science produces technologies of knowledge, essentially. And knowledge, Kareny and similar philosophers, feminist philosophers and other philosophers who sort of work in this conceptual area of critique are going to say knowledge produces technologies of power. The pursuit of scientific knowledge is ultimately inseparable from concerns of social justice and require critical examination of research aims and material conditions. I promise we're coming to the end of this. I know this has been a long one. So to evaluate knowledge production critically, we must attend to all perspectives, not merely those of dominant groups. This is going to be Narayan's point. The disembodied universal knower, this idea, the Cartesian, the cogito, erases critical distinctions between the types of knowledge possessed by differently positioned groups. Narayan is going to talk about this notion of double vision, that marginalized people must adopt the epistemic framework of their oppressors, essentially. If you're going to, alongside their own, so if you're going to be in any marginalized position within a society, you're going to have to not only see the world through your own lens, but through the lens of the people who make the rules. You're going to have to do that perspective taking, that imaginative labor of putting yourself in the position of the mindset of the worldview of the people who are making the rules, if you're going to be able to navigate that space. So you have to have this double vision. You have to be able to occupy both of those frameworks simultaneously. And this grants, according to Narayan, this is going to grant them access to a wider conceptual space because they have to have this dual perspective, this dual vision, what W.E.B. Du Bois calls this double consciousness. And that's where Narayan is getting this notion. This wider conceptual space than dominant groups. Dominant groups are not going to be under the same selection pressure. They're not going to face similar pressures to integrate marginalized worldviews. Why should they? They already belong to the group that makes the rules. What incentive structures exist for them to have to learn what it's like to see the world from the perspective of the people who are not a part of the dominant culture? So they have a narrower standpoint, is what Narayan is pointing to here. And she's specifically concerned with the exclusion of women from dominant discourse throughout history. Women's standpoint, according to Ryan, thus provides privileged access to gendered knowledge that is unavailable to men, essentially, as a historically dominant group, not having been forced to occupy that dual perspective. So excluding women's voices from the project of knowledge production creates a conceptually impoverished epistemology. It's a epistemology that is missing information. Having more perspectives at the table means you have a wider epistemology. You have a wider pool of knowledge. More perspectives is a good thing. Having more people be a part of the conversation means more ideas, more ways of seeing the world. And without that, it gets narrow, it gets very sort of egocentric, and it gets very restricted. And you end up with a lot of ideas. We're going to see Virginia Held is going to put a lot of pressure on this notion when we get into the sections on ethics and social justice toward the end of the module, or end of the course. So let's bring this to a close. Finally, we're coming in for landing. So does recasting knowledge in this way, as situated and perspectival, does that mean we abandon the search for truth? No. It only means that if we assume that having knowledge in the first place means you have to transcend all perspectives and find the view from nowhere, the God's eye view, what Richard Rorty calls the permanent neutral matrix, from which you may step outside of history and culture in order to critically and dispassionately analyze history and culture. There is no perspective outside of history and culture. There's no perspective outside of your situation and context from which to evaluate your context. You are always already in the world. Knowledge is inextricably embodied, embedded, and situated within a complex of social matrices that involve all these sort of intersecting axes. So the supposedly universal subject dissolves into a multitude of situated knowers whose collective perspectives offer a conceptually richer world picture. Questions of knowledge are always already questions of power, identity, and justice. Epistemology is thus a necessarily political project. When we abandon the myth of the disconnected universal knower, we realize knowledge doesn't merely represent the world. It participates in the world's creation. We are all engaged in the collective construction of reality, whether you want to be or not. We can choose to reproduce the narratives that we've been given by history, by culture, by the accidents of who we are and where we're born. Or we can choose to confront with open eyes the question of what sort of world should we create? What sort of world do we want to live in? What sort of world reflects our values? What kind of world ought we live in? And that's a difficult question, and that's an incredible responsibility, because every day we are reproducing the narratives that we've been handed without even realizing it. And it's a choice. It's always a choice. So maybe the role of philosophy isn't to escape the Cartesian theater. Maybe the role of philosophy is instead to burn the theater to the ground. All right, so that's the end of this. This has been long, but it's actually considerably shorter than the last time I did this. So victory on that level. Hope you stuck around for the whole thing. Hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. And in the handout version of this, there will, as always, be an existential comic accompanying it. And you've got, for Module 3, you've got the quiz, you've got the discussion, and you've got the written exam, which is going to cover material from Modules 1 through 3. And all of these lectures and all of the handouts that accompany them should have the information you need for those assignments within them. So there is a reason for me sitting in front of this microphone and going hoarse trying to talk about all this stuff and trying to parse Kant, which I still feel like I think that's why people are still talking about Kant, is that no one really 100% understands what Kant's talking about still. We're still figuring it out. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.